Good afternoon, everyone. Pleased to welcome you all to our quarterly update again, looking at the latest findings from the Robert Half Jobs Confidence Index in partnership with the Centre for Economics and Business Research. Today we have Chris Breen, Head of Economic Insight at Cebr, with us, who will be going through the latest JCI data for us, followed by a Q&A. Before I start, it would be good to just share some of the reasons why we've commissioned this study. And it's mainly down to the fact that businesses and consumer confidence is often analysed, and worker confidence is also analysed. And it's normally linked to unemployment and job vacancies and what are open job vacancies at any given time. And these are really, really valuable figures, but alone they don't really give us enough of an understanding of what's going on in the UK labour market, which, as we know, is increasingly complex. So this is a great way to show worker confidence through a macroeconomic lens. So by looking at jobs creation, job security, and job progression, we hopefully can give you a deeper insight into the state and the stability of the labour market. It also gives employers an ability to create more purposeful talent acquisition and learning and development strategies. And for job seekers, it also means they can make much more informed decisions around their own goals on their career, their remuneration, how their skills are matched with the labour market, and what is the wider picture looking at. So really excited to share the insights with you. So again, I'll present Chris to you. He is the Head of Economic Insight for the CBR. He's regularly interviewed on TV and radio and often presents his research at public events around the UK. We're really pleased to have Chris with us again, and we're happy to be working on the Jobs Confidence Index with the CBR for the last 2 years. So Chris, I'll pass over to you to take us through the latest report.
Well, thank you very much. I will just share my slides, and while I'm doing that, just reiterate what you were saying around the Jobs Confidence Index being a really important index because it looks at the labour market holistically, and particularly at this point in time where the main official stats related to the labour market are from the Labour Force survey, and they are subject to a number of issues in terms of the methodology and around the sample. So it's more important than ever to look at a range of different metrics, which this index does. So looking at the index as a whole, it increased marginally to 52.3 in this quarter. This is the 16th consecutive quarter in which it has been in positive territory. Actually, what we've seen with the JCI this year so far has broadly been in line with what we've seen with the overall economy. So in Q1 and Q2, we saw the JCI pick up at a relatively strong rate at the time that we were seeing economic growth pick up at a relatively strong pace. But the JCI this time around has seen a much more marginal increase, only 0.7 points, at a time where economic growth has also slowed quite considerably, although remaining just about positive. But nonetheless, this is now the third consecutive quarter of improvement in the index. And yeah, again, reflects that pattern that we've seen across the economy. Of the 4 constituent pillars, all 4 stood in positive territory, with 3 of them showing higher readings compared to the previous quarter, as you can see here. And we'll go into each one of these pillars in a bit more depth, starting with the job security confidence pillar. So this remained largely unchanged in Q3, recording only a 0.1 point increase. Nonetheless, this is the second highest reading since data began in 2009. And while the overall metric remains broadly unchanged, there were notable movements in 2 of the 4 components. Workers' confidence in their job security, which we find through a survey, reached a record high in Q3 2024, with data spanning back to Q1 2009. And it's really important to note that this survey data comes after the budget, which happened at the end of October. So the percentage of employees who express confidence in their job security over the next 6 months rose to 63%, up from 61.4% in the previous quarter. Confidence improved despite seemingly a labour market tightness that has eased in Q3 to its lowest level since Q2 2021. And the way that we look at this in the JCI is by looking at vacancies over unemployment. And vacancies fell. They fell for the 28th consecutive quarter, down to 831,000 from the peak of 1.3 million in May 2022. At the same time, the unemployment rate rose slightly by 0.1 percentage points to 4.3% in Q3 2024. So it seems as though, although again, we have to be cautious when looking at the unemployment rate, again, comes from the labour force survey, which is having issues at the moment, but there seems to be some evidence there that the labour market is cooling. The other aspect of this pillar is the level of temporary work, and that remained unchanged during the quarter. Looking now at pay confidence, this was the only pillar to decline in Q3, although it remains in positive territory. The decline here was primarily driven by a slowdown in real wage growth. So real wages, which is nominal wages and then minus inflation, real wages eased to 1.4% in the year to Q3. So that is down from 1.6% in Q2, but nonetheless is positive, which means that nominal wages are outstripping the inflation rate, and therefore people's standards of living on aggregate are getting better. It's also this rate of growth is well above the long run average. Now, the inflation, the nominal wage growth was partially influenced across Q2 and Q3 by base effects related to last year's one-off cost of living payments, which were made to public sector workers. So that has pushed down the growth rate. However, regular pay growth has also continued to ease across both the public and private sector, and it is expected that it will continue to ease in the quarters ahead. On I guess a more negative note, labour productivity continues to fall at minus 0.3% in the year to Q3, and that is bad news because that impacts businesses' ability to pay good wages and increase wages in the future. Also, on the negative side, our pay gaps measure, which looks at demographic pay deviations across UK occupations, also worsened during the quarter. However, jobs earning security, which measures the proportion of workers whose pay remained stable between pay periods, continued to improve, which means that more employees are facing income stability. Moving on to the job search and progression confidence pillar, this experienced the strongest quarterly improvement amongst the 4 pillars. Again, 2 of the 4 components of this pillar increased during the quarter, and the main driver, like with the first pillar, was the improvement in the surveyed confidence of workers. This time, the confidence that workers have in their future career prospects over the next 5 years. And that was the key driver for the improvement in this index. This was also the highest level of confidence in this measure since Q3 2023, and comprised of 15% of workers feeling very confident and around 32% feeling confident. Now, there's also some indication here as well that the labour market is easing. In this pillar, we use the share of involuntary part-time workers, and that has increased slightly to 10.8%, which is a higher share since Q1 2022. And as you can see in the chart, there seems to be a bit of an upwards trend over the last few quarters. We also look at social mobility, which is measured in terms of access to professions by education. So looking across different occupations as a percentage, how many of those have a degree or equivalent. And that experienced a marginal decline over the quarter and continues a pattern of long-term decline, meaning that more and more certain occupations are really only it's only those with degrees or equivalent who have those type of roles. More positively, levels of economic inactivity have fallen very slightly in the quarter, and there seems to be a bit of a downwards trend over the last couple of quarters, which is very good news because we have obviously had a big increase over the last couple of years since the pandemic, and indeed it remains well above where we were before the pandemic. So good to see some of that starting to unwind, which should support labour market conditions going forward. Finally, the macroeconomic confidence pillar has now risen for 4 consecutive quarters. This was driven by improved consumer confidence, while business confidence fell slightly. Now, it is important to note that the data here is pre-budget, but in the macroeconomic confidence pillar, in the consumer confidence metric, it's really interesting that this has been driven by forward-looking indicators, not only of job security, but also of household finances. And the consumer confidence as a whole is at the highest reading since Q4 2021. Looking at business confidence, this fell slightly, with services optimism continuing to trail manufacturing optimism, despite services driving growth throughout the economy in 2024 to date. So that's it for the index as a whole. Now onto the hot topic. This time around, we asked both employers and employees for their views on education and on-the-job training and the relative importance of both for career progression, job performance, and a number of different aspects of working life. So starting with workers, a majority of employees found that believe that education has been important in equipping them with the skills necessary for career success. As you can see by the chart, a majority of occupations on the whole agreed that education was important for career success, with only elementary and routine jobs in net disagreement on that. Now, there was a degree of variation between different demographic groups. Females placed more importance on education than males. Younger workers placed more importance on education than older workers, but across those different demographic groups, all were in net agreement that it is important for career progression. Also, quite interestingly, those with degrees or equivalents and those without degrees or equivalents were both in net agreement that education is important for career success, although those with degrees were more likely to agree with the importance of education. But despite that finding of education being important, actually, it's clear that job-specific training is more important for job performance and a number of different indicators than education. So over 2/3 agreed that skills-based training is more beneficial for formal education for job performance. And notably, each occupation group had a majority of respondents in agreement with the statement. Again, both highly educated and non-highly educated workers agreed with that statement. As you can see on the chart, there was also a majority who agreed that practical skills and relevant training offer greater job mobility. And across occupational groups, those in managerial director roles and those in professional, technical and scientific roles were more likely to agree with that statement. Most respondents also view job-specific training as essential for career advancement, and just over half of employees agreed that formal degrees become less relevant as careers progress. So that's what workers told us. What did employers tell us? So on average, 61% of SME employers consider a university degree or higher education qualification to be important when hiring. So for all role groups, as you can see on the chart, a majority of SME employers agreed that a university degree is important, even for those non-technical roles. But when we asked employers, what is the primary reason that you require a degree when you do so, only just over a third said that it was the technical knowledge gained through relevant higher education degree that was the main reason. Actually, it was a number of different other factors which were shown to be important. So just over a quarter said that it was a basic level of knowledge or competency that is signaled through having a degree. For 14%, it was just a way to filter candidates in highly competitive fields. And around 10% said it was the soft skills that are gained through a degree. Only 18% of employers said that they never require a degree, which was much more prevalent for micro firms at around 30% compared to small or medium-sized firms at 17 and 6% respectively. It was also more prevalent for hospitality firms, with a quarter of them saying that they never require degrees. But what's also interesting with SME employers that they also saw that training and development as more important for valuing a candidate and their potential. So as you can see, there was 40% of SME employers were much more likely to see experience and skills-based hiring as more beneficial for identifying the value of a candidate, compared to only 21% who said the same for education-based hiring, and there are similar numbers when asked about the potential of a candidate. But then we asked, are you shifting towards skill-based hiring, or are you continuing to focus on degree-based hiring? And only 34% said that they are shifting towards skill-based hiring. 10% said that they have always prioritized skills-based hiring. But that was slightly outweighed by 48% who said that they weren't shifting their priorities or were focusing even more on degree-based hiring. Interestingly, we also asked what is more beneficial for skills shortages and for diversifying talent pools. And again, SME respondents were more likely to agree that is more beneficial to focus on skill and experience-based hiring compared to degree-based hiring. So finishing, as we always do, on some forward-looking commentary. So as I've already discussed, the UK economy grew by only 0.1%, which is much down on the rates of growth that we were seeing in the first half of the year. This was always expected to be the case, that growth would ease after the initial post-recession period. Nonetheless, the degree to which momentum has been lost has been surprising. In October, annual inflation measured by the CPI index rose to 2.3%, mainly due to a 10% increase in the Ofgem energy price cap. We now expect that inflation will remain slightly above the 2% target for an extended period of time, probably for the entirety of next year and possibly beyond, due to energy costs remaining elevated alongside wage and services costs remaining elevated as well. Nonetheless, again, this has been expected for some time, and given that it takes something like 18 to 24 months for interest rate changes to fully feed through the economy, we expect that the Bank of England will continue to cut rates while inflation remains above target, as long as there's enough evidence that those areas of the economy where inflation remains high, as I just mentioned, wages and services price inflation, as long as they continue to see a downwards trend in those areas, they don't necessarily need the headline rate to go below target before they cut interest rates again. And we do expect that the labour market will improve over 2025. Real wage growth should remain positive and interest rates should continue to ease. All of that will support household spending and growth, which will feed through to businesses' demand for labour. The budget will boost wages temporarily through the increase in the minimum wage, but the employer NICs increase could lower wages over the medium to long term. So we expect overall that the economy will grow at a rate below 1% this year. It will be the second consecutive quarter that the economy hasn't hit that 1% milestone. However, growth should then gradually recover towards the long run rate of around 1.7% over the next couple of years. The budget will likely delay the time that it takes growth to reach to that top speed. But the real measure of success on the budget will be if planned investments can reach the potential growth, can increase the potential growth rate of the economy. And one key factor in all of this is improving productivity, which is the only real way to boost real wages and standards of living sustainably in the long run. So it must continue to be a key focus for the government over the next 5 years. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and hand back over to Chris L.
Thanks for that, Chris. Yeah, really, as always, really insightful and encouraging to see. But it'd be good for you to maybe just give a bit more insight into some of the areas. So I guess my first question would be, what do you think are the main reasons for the increase in job confidence overall?
Yeah, so really the main drivers of job confidence of the index this time around are the surveyed components of confidence. So that is in our own survey where we ask about job security over the next 6 months, where we ask about job progression over the next 5 years. In both instances, despite the budget, we've seen an increase in confidence. And then in that macroeconomic confidence pillar, which is also based on surveys, it was confidence over household finances in the next 12 months. Those three components have driven the improvement in the JCI this time around, and were enough to mitigate some of the downwards factors. So this time around, it was easing real wage growth and some metrics which seem to indicate that the labour market is cooling.
Interesting. And then I think if we looked at the report, job security confidence and search progression confidence have had big improvements this quarter. Any insights you'd share for what you're seeing there?
Yeah, so it is a really interesting picture. So as I've mentioned, if you look at the kind of fundamentals of the labour market, they seem to have worsened slightly since last quarter. Unemployment has risen. And real wage growth has declined slightly, but yet confidence just continues to improve and improve. What I think is going on is that we have had now a number of years since the pandemic where the jobs market has just been really tight, and people have been told over and over again that it's an employee's jobs market, and there's lots of skill shortages, and it's hard to find workers. And now we've been told, people, including myself, have been saying that what we're expected to see this year is a slowdown in the jobs market and a cooling, and that things will worsen. And while that has been the case, it has been the case only to a marginal degree, and probably to the extent that most people haven't really felt that in their day-to-day working lives. So if people, who have been expecting some sort of slowdown have actually seen things, most people are actually, feeling pretty secure in their job. They're continuing to see strong wage growth, which is outstripping inflation. I think it's reaching that point where people are now starting to internalize the experiences over the last couple of years, which have been skill shortages, not necessarily needing to worry about losing your job. I think people probably have a lot of other concerns on their minds, cost of living and issues like that. And it probably means that actually is one of my main concerns my job security over the next 6 months based on what I've experienced over the last couple of years? Probably not. So I think that's probably what is going on with the surveyed confidence metrics in the JCI.
That makes sense. And you mentioned employee unemployment has risen slightly, and you mentioned the labour market loosening. But how confident are you that it is actually loosening?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and it's something that not just us at CBR, but other economists are grappling with at the moment. As I said, there's a lot of question marks around the official data right now, and with that particular survey, which that gives us the unemployment rate, it gives us the employment rate, it gives us economic inactivity. It's a pretty important survey. So when there are issues with the sample, there's issues with the methodology, which ODS are very transparent and open about. But it means that the degree of uncertainty around what's happening with the labour market is much greater. And indeed, there was a report recently which thought that actually it may be up to 1 million people that the labour force survey might be underestimating the current level of employment. So right now, it's really important to look at a range of other metrics. That's what the JCI does. That's what we are doing. So some of those, including vacancies continuing to fall. If you look at payroll data, which comes from HMRC, from pay as you earn data, it seems as though there's been a slowdown in the rate of growth over the last couple of years, and actually now we're hitting the point where it seems as though payrolled employees are actually starting to fall now. So add to that what the labour force survey is telling us, that unemployment is increasing. It seems as though the story does seem to be that there is a loosening labour market. But again, with all of these metrics, it's clear that if you look historically, it's still a very tight labour market. So the change is relatively marginal compared to how the labour market has been in previous decades.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so what do you think from this report in particular, or the latest version of the JCI, what do you think we've learned about skills in hiring and what's going on at the moment?
Yeah, it's really interesting. So I think, clearly employers and employees were in agreement that education is really important, not just your degrees, but actually, even those who didn't go to university also said that education is very important. But it's clear that the experience and skills that you learn on the job and throughout your career are even more important. And that kind of holds true for most roles, for most demographic groups, etc. So with that in mind, it's interesting that a majority of employers are not looking to focus more on skills-based hiring, even though they tell us that it can be beneficial for diversifying talent pools and for easing skill shortages. So the question, I guess, is why, particularly if we expect that the labour market will remain tight and potentially even get tighter and tighter as over the next few years. So it will be interesting to see how that progresses. Obviously, the fact that employers have told us it's not just the skills, the technical skills that are gained through degrees, but actually the number of other signals that come with a degree, the fact that those are what are important in making hiring decisions. It may be that employers need to work out similar signals through on the job training and experience, which obviously can vary massively from person to person with different experiences. So coming up, I guess, with signals that hold true in the same way that degrees do, it may be that may be kind of one of the elements that is leading to a little bit of reticence in terms of moving towards skills-based hiring. But it may be that, as clearly there is still a large proportion of employers that are looking to go down that path, and perhaps as employers do so successfully, it may then add a little bit of momentum. But it'll be really interesting to see how that develops in the years, given just how tight we expect the labour market to be, at least in certain sectors.
Yeah, agree. And you also mentioned the budget a number of times throughout your report. So how do you think the changes proposed in the autumn will impact businesses and job seekers?
Yeah, so again, it's something that's been on our mind quite a lot in recent weeks. Clearly, the main change that will impact the economy will be the increase in employer NICs. There's a lot of question marks around how that will impact the economy. It's likely that businesses will be able to stomach some of those costs without passing them on, but probably, well, clearly not all of them, and probably not a lot of them. So the question is then how much does get passed on, and how do they pass that cost on? And there's three potential channels. It'll either be through actually just deciding to hire less people, or it will be through higher prices, or it will be through lower wages. And it's likely that it will be a combination of all three, but which of those channels will dominate is still to be seen. And it's likely that what happens with the labour market as a whole will have an impact on how businesses decide to pass it on. For instance, if the labour market remains very tight and you're struggling to find the workers that you need, you're probably not going to change hiring decisions as much in the short term. You might just decide to pass it on through prices. But if the labour market is much looser and it's easier to find people, then you might decide to go down a different route. So these issues are interlinked, and it remains to be seen. But certainly it will be inflationary to a degree. It will impact prices. It probably will mean lower employment to a degree, but how much we don't know. And it probably will mean that wage growth is lower than it otherwise could have been, although we will have that short-term boost from the increase in the national living wage.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting to see what we see from the next set of results as well, given that will give us a bit more time to see some of the fallout from the budget. So I think, look, Chris, that's, as always, that's been really insightful. Great to share what you're seeing and the detail on the report. So for everybody who's watching, please take a look at the report, which can be found on the Robert Half website. As always, if you would like to get in touch to discuss the findings in more detail, we'd be more than happy to help. As always, there will also be another webinar in a quarter's time where Chris and I will sit down and go through and see how these things have impacted the latest findings. So, Chris, thanks again for your time and look forward to catching up next quarter.
Thank you very much.